Polka dots, the trademark of Kusama, of a Kusama happening. Um, Red, green, and yellow polka dots can be the circles representing the earth, the sun, or the moon. Their shapes and what they signify do not really matter. I paint polka dots on the bodies of people, and with those polka dots, the people will self obliterate and return to the nature of the universe. It's an excerpt from Infinity Nets by Kusama, and we'll look at it. She has spent the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s making dots, and she continues to this day. And she creates environments um, for these fields of dots, and there are a lot of aesthetics to this as well. They're really beautiful, and sometimes they evoke existing natural and organic forms. Sometimes they feel very universal, just as she says here, right, to return to the nature of the universe. Here's an installation. These are one of her installations. They are called infinity rooms, and they're really not that big. In this case, in this one, I believe there's water on the floor. There's lights hanging from the ceiling and mirrors all around. So what happens is it creates a push into infinity. It just goes on and on and on. And when you stand in there, you see yourself as well. This is one that's not so much a room that you walk into. This, you stick your head through the opening. And here's an example of a person's face. You can see that face repeated. It's essentially the same piece. And but others, you go into an actual environment and the door closes behind you, and you get to see yourself and the environment repeated infinitely. This piece is likely related to the obliteration room. We're going to see a little video on that. These are one of her infinity net paintings. So in this case, she's making the polka dots, the dots, by making the infinity nets surrounding them, right? So she's actually making the positive space there, not the dot negative space. So we're going to look at a couple of videos, and we'll move on to another artist.
私の希望というのは将来芸術家になることだった。それで10歳の頃から私は絵を山のように描きました。母が絵を描いてはいけない。お前は財閥の人と結婚して将来家庭の主婦になると言って私の絵の具だとかカンバスなどを取り上げてしまいました。
Making art was something that she seems to have done in opposition to her family, but she also was innately talented, and you look at the early drawings and they are completely exquisite. The challenges to become an accomplished artist in a Japanese provincial milieu must have driven this notion that at some point she would have to escape. She was on a train to stardom. She knew exactly what she wanted to do. She had a suitcase full of drawings, and she set about selling herself.
New York に着いた時に初めてエンパイアステートビルに乗って行ってそれから広いニューヨークを見て私は感動しました。そして私はいつかこのニューヨークを自分の心の中に芸術的な山のような 私の蓄えられた力でもってこのニューヨークをいつか制覇して世界に飛び出ていくということを深く誓い合いました。
When she first came to New York, it was a man's world. The art world was aggressively male. It was a cutthroat period, you know. I think it was very difficult to be a woman artist.
そしてニューヨークでもって私は死に物狂いで戦いました。美術のことで。そして一生懸命絵を描き、細かい網目の作品を作って、そしてそれが33フィートの大きさになるの。朝から晩までその網を描いておりました。私がね、絵を描いてるとね、そしてその絵がね、床を見るとその絵がね、発展してって、向こうを見るとね、幻覚が来て、全部ね、幻覚がって渦まって、それでね、結局私はね、エンバイロメンタル芸術家としてね、発展することになってました。
She was taking away your ability to focus, breaking all boundaries of space. And the exhibitions that I had, in particular the Peep Show, that did the job. It was an octagonal room, it was painted black, and there were openings where you could stick your head in. And the ceiling of it set up a series of lights. The rhythm of that machine was faster and faster. Up till Kusama, there were many artists from the Renaissance on who were involved with perspective and infinity, but it was all a fake because you knew, you as a viewer, you were always aware that you were the master, that it was a painting that was encompassed by a frame, and the artist was playing with space, but it wasn't enveloping you.
脅迫的に押し寄せてくる集積、弾痕の集積といったものが私の大いに興味を惹かれる作品のテーマであります。集積っていうのは宇宙の星が一つだけでは存在しなく、地球も一つだけ存在しなく、全宇宙星の集積であります。で、私たちも結局花を見るとそれと同じ花がいくつもいくつもつながっていて、それに対して追いかけていくとパニック状態に陥って、私自身その花を食べてしまう。それは結局体の調子が悪くてね、あまりにも絵描きすぎて、それで具合が悪くてこっちの方に来まして。
To go back to Tokyo and to start from scratch again for Kusama was quite extraordinary, because she wasn't known there and she hadn't been recognised. Clearly, the strains and stresses of life, the memories, have forced her to withdraw. But what she's always done, she has always managed that process incredibly well. Kusama is now living in a mental institution, but by day she occupies across the street in a busy suburban neighbourhood of Tokyo a very well-appointed studio facility where she has a team of assistants, and she has a space for painting, she has a space for her library, her archive, and every morning she gets there and she's a consummate professional, and she works from 9 to 6. And I think there's a sort of a managing madness about Kusama, which is so utterly sane, which is really interesting. She's used her trauma, she's used these experiences in her past, she's been able to harness experiences that might drive other people insane to enormously productive ends. She's an extraordinary person in that way. At the start of the project, this room was completely white. White ceiling, white floor, white walls, white furniture. People come in, they are given a sheet of coloured stickers in different sizes, which have been produced especially for the project and in accordance with the artist's specifications, her choice of colour, her choice of finish, and her choice of size. And then everybody is invited to place the stickers anywhere they like in the room, according to any pattern, any idea they have, anything they like they can do with the stickers. Kusama is best known for her brilliantly coloured dotted surfaces, her installations with blow-ups and her walls covered in brilliant spots. And in her biography, she talks about experiences really of a very young child, almost sort of hallucinogenic experiences, where her vision of landscape and people was clouded by spots. And in her very, very first mature works of art, just after finishing art school in Kyoto, the spot emerges as a pattern in her work. And from that period of time, she comes back to the spot with great regularity. And by the end of the 60s, she's actually painting the landscape, she's painting spots on people's bodies, onto animals, and the spot becomes a very regular motif throughout her work. It's her way of kind of covering the surface. It's a reflection of her vision, but it's also a way of embracing the whole world in a kind of overall pattern. And the interesting thing about this work in particular is that where she's moved from creating an environment of spots that we passively appreciate or enjoy or walk through, she's now moved on to actually involving the audience in the creation of this dotted, spotted interior. I think Kusama is now seen alongside people like Murakami or Damien Hirst or Jeff Koons as a kind of globally branded artist. Her spots are ubiquitous and they're instantly recognisable. They're on the face of the London Tube map at the moment. Everywhere we go, we see, to the biennials and triennials across the world, you see big Kusama installations. But what is also important to recognise is she really does fit into art history. She was there in late surrealism, she was there at the birth of pop, she has a relationship to minimalism, she's a real key practitioner in the beginnings of performance and action art. So she's very much somebody who's an insider, but she was never attached to any one movement for very long. So she's always also somebody who kind of is an outsider. She moves in and out of the kind of principal, avant-garde moments of the mid to late 20th century. And now she stands aside them because she's got to that kind of, got that status where she's a kind of unique, almost celebrity artist of our era.
Okay. I really wanted to show you those. I think I want to just encourage you to think about a couple of things. One is the sort of interior space of the idea of infinity. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to play with the idea of infinity and really think about it, and it reaches an overwhelming spot. And I think that type of overwhelming feeling that she said, when she saw so many flowers, and I think the sort of interior, like if you close your eyes really tight, you see lots of dots. And I think the sort of massive universal scale and the sort of cellular interior scale that we as human beings operate from are really kind of caught in her work. And I think to some extent we usually, as a society, look to people who might be making art obsessively, and the fact that she's in a mental institution, that we might kind of look at it as a novelty. But I think what she's doing is a very human thing, and I just encourage you to think about that. We're going to go through these next artists a little bit more quickly. Jedediah Caesar What you're looking at here, especially like in the image right in front of us, you can see like a lot of debris and junk and stuff from his like studio floor. If you look at the back wall there, that is a very highly polished slab where all of the junk from a studio floor, like the one in front, got put into a cube, right? Soaked with resin to create a hard piece, and you can see that over to the right. Then, with a saw, it was sliced and then polished up so that you would see bits and pieces emerging through. Okay? So, the sort of tracking of time, making time visible, right? Also thinking about process insofar as what is important. We usually think it's the finished product, but what if every process along the way gets saved and embedded and becomes part of the final process and product? Okay, and I think Caesar does that and looks at that. Here's another slab. And sometimes you can see and recognize objects and stuff, which are pretty cool when you're looking at his work. He's an LA artist. And we'll just maybe we'll watch a little video of his.
The piece is made from a basically industrial block of styrofoam. The whole surface is this kind of web-like resin. So I put it on the palette and I started the process of painting these different layers of resin on it. And every time I would do a new layer, I would change the color as a way of keeping track. It sort of made a timeline in a sense. And then I'd paint a new layer on. It would eat into the styrofoam and spread as it did, and kind of reveal more styrofoam. So what I did was just try to keep going until you couldn't see the styrofoam anymore. And it had built up this kind of colored skin all around it. But I imagine that there's these sort of cavernous areas in there. I really don't actually know to what degree it's styrofoam anymore. The smell of the piece is something that's people mention a lot. And the funny thing to me is people have been telling me that it smells like honey, which never occurred to me. To me, it's sort of a really industrial funk, which gives it that aspect. It tells you something about the piece through that smell, something about the kind of origins of the material or the place of the material. Thinking about this piece, the way that the styrofoam and the resin kind of worked their way into each other and really became one molded material, this piece made me think of this time when I was walking around New York and there was some late spring snow, and all these particles of dirt and other things had worked their way into the snow. So you knew it was snow, but it was also a record of a lot of other things. It really became one molded material. So that's what it is now. I think the core in some places is styrofoam, but it's all kind of intermeshed with this color.
I think that's interesting, and even though the styrofoam piece is different from those studio pieces that I showed you, the idea that an actual snowfall could be a record when it mixes with the detritus, like in the discarded dirt and other objects, especially in New York City where it's very dirty. It's just something to think about process and the things that make up our life. We like to think of the beautiful things all around us, but our lives are made up of all things, and I think sometimes artists really draw our attention to that. Ellen Harvey is an artist working in Brooklyn, and I'm going to just show you an early project of hers and then another early-ish project of hers. This one was called the New York Beautification Project, and she would go around spots in New York City where things were kind of run down and there was graffiti. And then she'd make these little kind of Renaissance style, landscape paintings. And you can see one right there on the upper right hand side there. And this was the locations of all the graffiti and pieces that she did. Here's some close-ups that I'll show you. Right? So this was a wonderful series in that you might stumble upon them, and she really did work hard. I have a book of hers, and she tried to track down the artists, like the graffiti artists, who did the graffiti that was the ground for her pieces that she put on top, and she tried to give them credit. Couldn't always do it though. Right? These little lovely paintings. And some cool locations. That's one of my favorites right there on an old like fire alarm box. Here's another one of her series, and um, it was called the Museum of Failure. And I always ask you to do Quality of Failure. And so here you have these really beautifully etched kind of decorative frames with nothing in them. And here you can see images where the photographs obscure the people there, but they're framed. And I think one of the things I would encourage you to think about is, to some extent, how we bring the context to everything that we're seeing. Is that almost very little is there, um, because we bring it, like our presence when we're looking is so powerful. And to some extent, she also was thinking about how many issues in the world um, really need to be addressed and fixed, and we have to assemble so many different perspectives to get that full context. But in any case, it also plays with, historical presentation, um, presence and absence, and and our own narcissism to some extent, the way we want to see ourselves in things. Lots to think about with her work. You can see the installation there. All right, we're going to switch to Mark Bradford. He's an African American artist from LA. He says, politically and socially, we're at the edge of another precipice. I'm standing in the middle of a question about where we are as a nation. And I really resonate with that personally. I think we've talked about a lot of things around race and gender in this class, and I want to keep pushing you to think that way. Here's so he's interested in topographies to some extent, how different worlds get placed next to each other, and how the language of our worlds, I'm using plural, how the language of our worlds reveals themselves to us. And so this is a very topographical type of map abstraction that he made. It's called Across 110th Street. And one of his processes is he will take kind of advertisements that get put up on fences and walls, and peel them off and use rope and twine and glue and layers, and he both adds to it and sands into it and rips open and creates these echoes of the images that were there, and then he also will replace those images and re-put them back in. And so he's in constantly additive and subtractive modes. Here's another one called Scorched Earth. And so, to some extent, he's really addressing a dynamic landscape, but it's more of a social or cultural landscape, and what are the materials of that landscape. And here's one called Los Moscos, and you can look on and you can see like pieces, right? Look at the very upper portion of this, you can see it's kind of upside down. It says sale now, okay? And so he'll flip things and he'll use right side, back side, and he'll paint on top. He thinks of these as paintings even though they're mostly collages. But I really think he's a wonderful artist, and I encourage you to look into him. Think about all of these people, right? And let's talk on Wednesday about them, all right? Try to think of one question for each artist. All right, have a wonderful week, friends.